Any manager who is managing people should look at this. And the big takeaway is ask your people how they're doing and what they want. Listen to them and be curious enough to say what you can do and what you can't do. This isn't for employees. I want people to feel hopeful. We're seeing lots of headlines about this tech company laying off people, government jobs that are leaving. A lot of people are really afraid at this time. I want people to know that there are companies that are doubling down on their investments in people.
Will AI replace my job standpoint versus how do I learn AI to upskill and future-proof myself? What's your take?
Welcome to the podcast, where we introduce you to incredible humans who share their journeys with the mission to inspire you to harness your own inner tenacity to drive your life and career forward. And now, your host, Adam Posner.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast, where I bring the best and the brightest in the world of business, marketing, and personal growth to help you harness your inner tenacity and drive your career forward. Folks, my guest today on the podcast is Dr. Angela Jackson. She is a powerhouse in the future of work. As the founder of the Future Forward strategy, she helps leaders reshape organizations and build the human capital needed to stay competitive. A lecturer at Harvard Grad School of Education, she also led the Future of Work Grand Challenge, an initiative to reskill 25,000 displaced workers into living wage jobs. And her insights on workforce innovation have been featured on CNN, Harvard Business Review, and major conferences like TEDx Technomy. And get ready for a deep dive on the future of work. Let's get to it. Angela, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you, Adam. So great to be here.
We did. And first and foremost, congratulations on the book making the New York Times bestseller list.
Yeah, that's been just significant to see this resonating. I think employees, workers, and employers know that we have to do things differently in the workplace. So I'm glad this book is leading the conversation.
Well, we're going to get to the book a little later in the conversation, but first we have to introduce you, right? Folks don't know who you are. And I've been doing this weird, I don't know if it's a weird thing, but I find it's really important to understand folks' origin story, especially when they are in our line of work, the people business. So I'm going to start off with a very, very bold question that I think will set the table here. May I ask you, what did your parents do for a living?
Oh, I love that question. So I was raised by my grandparents in a small town in Illinois, and my grandfather worked on the line, putting doors on cars at a Chrysler factory. And my grandmother worked as a certified nurse's assistant. So I like to say they taught me the value of a hard day's work.
They taught you the value of a hard day's work. But when you look back at that time, being raised by them, and you look back now of who you are and the character and the way you show up in this world, what would you attribute to them?
I think the biggest thing is just really investing in the importance of investing in people in general. They were the people in my community that would invest in neighbors, open door policy, having people over. But the other thing that they taught me was the importance of investing in people in your workplace. They come home and talk about their work and they weren't being invested in. I like to think of them when I look back as almost like cogs in a wheel. My grandfather was on the factory line putting doors on a car and wasn't much invited to do much else besides that.
That's an interesting one too, because so many times, and I say it's about your career as well too. It's almost more important to learn what you don't like, right, as you go from job to job, right? Because that'll teach you as you move forward in your career. Hey, I, for example, when I worked at American Express, I didn't like the financial side of it. I didn't like doing the numbers and the reporting. I wanted to stay more on the marketing and creative side. But I want to double back to something that you talked about, getting that value from your grandparents, is investing in others, right? And it's really having a genuine care of helping and supporting others. And I think that's something that's been a theme throughout your career. When I look back at your career, I mean, you went from biz dev and partnerships where you're obviously investing into knowing about companies and forming those relationships. How did we get to where we are now? How do we get to this point of being a New York Times bestselling author about workplace?
Yeah, so I'd say I did all types of jobs. So, first job was a lemonade stand when I was 5, did that business development and had this job, the last one working in corporate America, an executive at Nokia. I was like that movie Up in the Air. And all of a sudden it came crashing down. And I write about this in the book. I had flown from New York to LA and I was going to be there for an hour meeting and I was going to get back on a plane, fly to New York, stop off, and then on my way to Europe. In the midst of that trip, I was like not 100% present. And I was driving down the street and almost missed my turn. So I turned quickly. Unbeknownst to me, there was another car beside me. And so I caused the accident.
Mm,
And what that made me realize in that moment, literally full stop, totaled the car, had to go into physical therapy, is that, you can drive hard for work, but if you're not really thinking about your life outside of work, family, that doesn't mean anything. And for me, I hadn't seen my family in weeks. I was single. I had all the trappings of success, but I didn't have that work life balance that many
mm.
people talk about, but rarely reach. And what came for me out of that moment was this whole idea around work life integration, right? It's all happening at the same time. And I really got curious about what makes work work for more people. And I started researching corporations and how they were investing in people and how those investments actually paid out on in terms of the bottom line and lift on the financial side for the company.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that story. I think there's so much to unpack out of that. I think first and foremost, we're at this, inflection point where there are companies. Listen, there's times when work is work, right? We have to do what we have to do to put food on the table. And listen, even when you're working, you're working. My wife's an attorney, and she says all the time, when I'm heads down working, that's what I'm getting paid for, to do work, but not to the point of burnout. And I think we're at this inflection point where, as a society, hopefully, we're moving away from that, where companies are valuing the mental and physical mindset and well-being of their employees. Because at the end of the day, without your employees, you have nothing. And we're at this point where people matter and you invest into people, and people are your companies. But why are there still companies out there that just don't abide by this?
Well, I think the big thing is that I look at that. I don't know about you. I was raised in Gen X, and the social contract for a job is someone's giving you a paycheck. You put your head down, like you said, your wife does,
Mm,
go hard. If anything's going on at home, you check that at the door when you come in. I think the benefit of the pandemic is that we realize that even though people are supposedly checking things at the door, what's
mm,
happening in your personal life at home that still impacts your ability to show up. And what happened during the pandemic is that employers were really open to that. We were thinking, what does it take to make sure our people can show up? We gave flexible benefits. We said, work remotely. Health was the number one priority. And that was very different than what I write about in the book, where that zero sum workplace was all about just your productivity and nothing else. What we're seeing now in the workplace is a bit of a retrenchment. We want to go back to that zero sum workplace that we know weren't working for many people. And we're seeing all the headlines about that. What we're not seeing are the headlines of the businesses who are thinking about investing differently. And they're investing in what I call a win-win workplace. So they're thinking about, how do we create new benefits for employees so they can engage? I don't know about you, but many of us are in the sandwich generation. We're caring for elderly
yep.
relative parents, but we also have children. And so when we talk about flexibility, it's not because, for kicks and giggles, I like to be at home. It's really about, how do
I
I
need
do
it.
all the things, right? How am I helping parents? How am I helping kids? And the companies who are really accounting for that, and I write about some of them in the book, some of them are creating on care, childcare. They're giving flexible benefits. They're offering remote work and flexible times to start and end work so that they can keep their A players engaged. And really, that's what's winning the moment.
When a company, I think it distills down to a few things. One, output over hours, right? And we're making a very broad statement here. Obviously, there's a lot of professions and industries where you need to be in an office or in the field or whatever you're doing here. But for those roles where they're not, there's the companies that understand when you're giving someone trust to do the job that you hired them for, choices of where they could work. Hey, guess what? We have an office. We have an office in the city. I understand that some people are more productive. Let's call it what it is too, Angela. There are some folks where home may not be the most productive for them, and for some reason, or they may not have an ideal office. But for a company to give a choice, to give them options and trust, I trust you to do this. You have an option and you have a choice to get the job done. That's a competitive advantage for talent. If you want the best talent out there, you have to give people at this stage of their life, exactly as you said, you got to meet them where they are. And it's not like, hey, Jamie Dimon's out there saying, no, people are just jerking around. They're messing around all day on Zoom calls and not even getting their job done. Does that mean you don't trust the people that you hired to do the job?
Well, you're in New York. A couple months ago, Spotify put this billboard in the middle of Times Square, and in substance, it said, we let our people work remote because we hire adults, right? So they're
Mm-hmm.
putting a line in the sand. Everything's about trust. And if you talk to anyone with remote workers, you know when someone's not doing their job. It becomes
Performance is
very
performance,
heavy.
right? Bad performance is bad performance.
Bad performance. And how are you, what we want to get away from is penalizing everyone because you have a few bad apples.
Mm.
And that's what we're seeing with some of these policies. By contrast, what we're seeing in this win-win workplace is that you have people who are building on trust, who are setting the bar and saying, hey, this is how we win together. These are the
Hmm.
expectations. And they're doing this for all workers, not just executives. In chapter 1 of my book called Centering Worker Voice, I talk about this company, CHI Doors. They had delivery drivers who were given their route and it was given during GPS. And we
Hmm.
all have experienced when GPS is supposed to show us the short route and it takes us
Right.
the wrong way. Well, this had been happening for these drivers. They asked the drivers a simple question. How can we make you more productive? Is there a better way that you could do your job? One of the drivers said, look, I live in this community and I lived here for 5, 6 years. The route you've given me is wrong. The company took that feedback seriously, not only looking at his route, but all of them. And what they found was that there were a more efficient routes. And what did that do? It saved them money. It saved them gas. It also saved frustration from employees who want to lean in, give their ideas, but they want someone to actually listen to them and act on them.
I want to talk about the pandemic because there was companies that, first of all, thank you for sharing that perspective and that story, because there were companies that were remote before COVID and they had no problem. Like, hey, this is what we've been doing. It's seamless. And then there are the two other buckets. There were companies, obviously, that were forced to go remote and did it well and saw the advantages of it and saw the productivity increase and saw the overall satisfaction. And then the other companies that fumbled the ball and they didn't want to do it. And now they're bringing people back to the office. Do you think there is value of having people in an office?
Absolutely. So in the win-win workplace, we're not saying everyone needs to be remote. What we're saying is if you're bringing people in the office, whether it's remote or just certain days that you're bringing people, it has to be with intention. What is the value of bringing people in if everyone's going to be on Zoom? So being really intentional about that. The second thing, when you bring up Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan Chase, when Jamie says, people on Zoom, they weren't really productive. But when you look at, JP Morgan Chase and their proceeds and their sales and their share price,
Looks like they're doing
they're
all right to
knocking
me.
it out of the park. And so what I offer in this book is that we actually need to begin rigorously measuring our investments in people and their outputs, just like we do other areas of the business. And so what we do is what I see that's happening in the workplace is nostalgia sets in from leaders. They think
Mm.
about how they progressed through the organization, how they were mentored because they had FaceTime and water cooler talk. We need to reimagine what that looks like now for today. What does this new generation of workforce, how do they want to be mentored? How do they need to be mentored? So it's just not throwing everything out, but it's re-looking at it with fresh eyes.
I'm glad you said that because I'm of the camp. Yes, I'm all about choice and options and trust, but I also look back and I wouldn't call it nostalgia. I'd almost call it my experience where I learned directly by working close when I was early on in the advertising industry, the body language, working side by side, working the manners, and some of the things that you can't get across a Zoom or a Slack channel. And I think those are irreplaceable. And I think the younger generation and younger workers might be losing out. Now, do I sound like the boomer in the room saying that? Yeah, but you know what? I find it hard for someone to get that experience without having the physical contact. With that being said, I think that there's a balance. And I think that we should find more opportunities, whether it be, let's just call it quarterly mandatory. And I use the word mandatory loosely here. Hey, once a month, we're going to have everybody in the office, right, who are close by. We're going to have, but with intention. And we're going to use it for training. We're going to use it for team building. We're going to use it quarterly offsites, whatever it is, because I don't think you could replicate it. And I also don't think humans were meant to work in silos. I think a lot of humans need human connection.
I completely agree with you. And another piece I talk about in the book, when you're talking about that human connection, bringing people in, we're seeing some of these companies be really creative about why doing that. So they've been doing cross training, job shadowing, letting employees step into other departments. Again, doing things that bring them deeper into the company and give them a deeper understanding of the business and the why behind it. And so I think the more that we can show the benefits of that, and that's again, measuring it and then reporting back what the benefits are, that's how you engage people and bring them along with these decisions. It's not just because I told you so or just because I was
Exactly.
measured that way. Let's tell some stories about the good things that have come out with people coming in the office and collaborating in different ways and deeper ways.
And I also find those studies, I take them with a grain of salt, right? Because you're seeing all sides of it. And I think any study comes out the way you kind of want it to come out if you're the one creating it, right? There's bias within the study itself that say, people are less productive remote or more productive remote. I think we've kind of gray washed this whole thing, and we need to really be mindful about the specific industry, the type of work that people are doing, and where there are moments for interaction and being intentional about it. So we've beaten this horse about remote work, right? And we've kind of gotten there too. I want to talk a little about the Future of Work Grand Challenge, aim to reskill 25,000 displaced workers. What is this all about? Tell us, unpack it, and explain the intention of it and what it's set to accomplish.
Yeah, so the Future Work Grand Challenge, I was leading a $50 million investment fund, and we're thinking about people who are working today. How do you skill up for the jobs of the future without going back and getting another degree, right? Most people, if you're in the world of work today, you really can't afford to do that. And so we're investing in solutions that we're giving trainings that could help people find these new in-demand jobs. Then the pandemic hit. And
Mm-hmm.
what was the future really became the present. And so we used some of these solutions to help people train for new jobs. They were placed in new jobs. 6 months after they were placed, I went back and with my team and we did interviews to find out, okay, how are you doing in this new job? Was it what you expected? What has that onboarding looked like? And what was fascinating and became the basis of this book was you had a set of workers who were really thriving, loved their new opportunity, the new sector that they were in. And then there were another set, some of them were already on to their next job. And we got curious about what were the differences. And the differences were really the companies and the conditions that
Right,
they were creating to
right,
help the
right.
worker thriving. And so a lot of that was just around, again, reimagining, relationships. What are the benefits of working for a
Mm.
company? How we're like skilling and investing in our company. And then I think the big one was the companies who are actually measuring this and saying, okay, we know we should invest in talent and it's the
Right.
right thing to do, but how do we know that what it's the business thing to do? And these companies were actually proving out that economic case of investing in workers to that dot, 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 and following that correlation to lift on the business side.
Well, what are some of those skills? What are some of those pieces that workers were yearning for? Like, was it AI, innovation? What were they?
Some of them are really simple. And I think, Adam, you might appreciate this. So the first was training frontline managers to be managers. I write this chapter on
Mm.
transitioning managers to leaders. Most of us, and myself included, when I was first promoted to a manager, I was promoted because I was a great individual contributor. Not that I knew anything about managing people. And that's the experience of a lot of managers. And one thing that we saw in that zero sum workplace that could have a marked improvement was really training managers on how to manage people and making sure that they understood that part of their role and responsibility is the mentoring of their team and what it means to be a manager at insert company. Once that management training has been put in, we've seen retention grow by 30%.
Wow.
And that's just because, again, a manager's understanding it's not all about what makes me drive as an individual. I need to put myself in the shoes of the people of my direct reports and really understand their needs, their expectations, and be the best champion for them as we move this work forward.
Do you think there's a delta of management training in the last 10, 15 years? Do you think we're not training managers how to be managers?
Tell me, and you'd have to tell me this is different. When you were a manager in the world of work, did you ever receive training on being a manager itself?
No, but I think this has to do with the function of us being remote. I think that either we don't know how to lead remotely. We were never trained to lead remotely. We're never giving any guardrails, any guidance. And a lot of managers were kind of thrown into the fire of how to lead and manage remotely versus in person.
That's exactly it. And I would argue we haven't even been taught to lead in person.
Yeah, right.
Through
True.
all of my jobs that I've had, and I had a long career in corporate America, no one put me through a management training. I went with my gut. I tried to learn from the mistakes of things that didn't work well when I was managed or mistakes I made early on in my career. And you try to do better and use the resources. But no one, when I was at Viacom or I was at Nokia, no one sat me down and said, okay, this is what it means to be a manager here at Viacom. This is what
There,
it means to be a manager at Nokia. And so
there was
what we're
no
seeing
formal.
is
There was
that
no formal training. There was
there
no
was no,
formal training along the way.
not on management itself. No.
Interesting too. Oh, it's a fascinating. So all right, we have to talk about it, Angela. We have to talk about
Yeah.
AI. And when I talk about AI, we're talking about it from let's talk about it from will AI replace my job standpoint versus how do I learn AI to upskill and future proof myself? What's your take?
So I love that you're bringing this conversation up about AI because as I've interviewed employees, workers, managers, everyone has this fear of becoming obsolete. So the first thing I like to say is AI in itself is neutral. If you want to be positioned for the future of work, you need to understand how you add value alongside AI. So if you think about your role, you think about the benefits of generative AI, how does it make you more productive? How does it eliminate some of your mundane tasks? How does it
Hmm.
help create new ideas, new business ideas? That's going to be the point of differentiation when we're looking at AI.
It's going to be the employees that embrace AI, that use it as a tool and not a crutch. The ones that use it to future proof themselves, where they're bringing value back to the organization, saying, here is how we, start with we, as a team, as a company, could use certain tools to do it better, faster, more efficient. Here's how I could bring to the table from an upskilling training perspective and how we can make the entire team better. Because what you want to be doing as an employee is continuing to add value to future proof yourself, right?
That's
Because you don't
exactly
want to
it.
be obsolete. You don't want to be obsolete because it happens real quick, especially in today's politically driven climate of efficiency, we'll call it.
That's exactly it. And I write about this in the book in one of the last chapters. I call it an ownership mindset.
Mm.
And so, as an employee, if you're thinking like an owner and this is your business, of course, you're thinking about how you develop yourself. You're thinking about what value can I bring to the organization? Every company is looking for someone who can bring value. And so, having an analysis of how you're able to do that with generative AI is going to set them apart. The other thing is, I tell a story in a book, and I had to anonymize this case study. It's about a global financial
You
firm.
got to protect the innocent, right?
You
Or
got to
not so
protect the
innocent.
innocent. But
Protect
one
the
thing
not
I
so innocent.
yeah. One thing I want to say to any of your listeners, just like you're thinking about how not to become obsolete, a lot of business leaders and companies are thinking about the same thing. So I write about this global financial firm. In every single department, they put someone dedicated to coming up with use cases for generative AI. Why are they doing that? Because there's a lot of things people and companies still don't know. And so any employees who are listening, you can help your employer really think about and chart their future from your perspective. And just remembering you have expertise based on your role and the work that you've done. So you are best positioned to share with your employee and your employer how they can add value using the generative AI.
Hey everybody, Adam here from the Podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by the team at Fountain. Fountain is your full-service frontline workforce management platform. I have to tell you, Fountain's offerings are some of the most robust I've seen for any product in the space. They offer full solutions for hiring, managing, and retention. They are truly a one-stop shop focused on the frontline workforce. They also create informative content using their data. For example, they analyze a bunch of data from their fast food chains and created a trend report you could download now on their website. They also have a new ebook out called Frontline Voices. There's a lot to dive into. Certainly check it out. And you could learn more at fountain.com, linked in the show notes. Thank you. So aside from AI, what's another trend you're seeing out there from innovation perspective that's really getting you excited? It may
So
not
I
just be a
think
tool, it could be a strategy, it could be a trend.
No, I love that you're saying the biggest strategy that we're doing is one around, and I write about this in the book, is measuring the investments in talent. So one thing we talk about all the time is investing in talent is the right thing to do. Talent is our most valuable resource, but many of us don't measure that. Many companies don't
Hmm.
measure that with the same rigor that they measure sales, productivity in other areas. And so what I'm seeing for some of these win-win workplaces that I get excited about is that they're able to tell you how their investments in people are actually paying off.
Well, that's critical too. I think it's an ROI, and when we talk about it from talent, some roles are quantifiable, right? They are maybe a sales role where it's saying, okay, this person brought in X amount more dollars than the person that they replaced. But some things are more subjective, and some things are more of a halo effect of affecting other folks within the organization. When you think about, let me put it this way: if you could redesign the traditional kind of workplace structure from scratch, what would you do to make it more equitable and to be higher performing?
Absolutely. So the first thing I do, and I talk about this in chapter 2, we have to reimagine relationships at work. So most organizations have hierarchies. So I'm always curious about the organizations who are lessening the experience of those hierarchies. How are you bringing people together across titles, across levels, so that there's more understanding about the roles, so there's opportunities to cross train, be mentored, and learn about areas that, again, may not be in your purview today, but if you had some of those insights could help you do your better job and have a wider view of what the organization's strategy is. So that's the big one, is really thinking about how do we bring everyday employees into the thinking of the leadership. So not that we get tired of just leading on the C-suite or the management to tell us everything. When we think about the future of work, everyone's going to need to be at some level a knowledge worker and really
Mm.
making meaning of their role, their insights, their vantage point, and thinking about how they can drive business and contribute to the organization.
Do you think, how do I want to phrase this? I think employees need to take more responsibility for their career and not relying on an organization to lead everything. And I think that people need to find their voices, and I think companies need to be more receptive to hearing and moving out of this old school mentality of if you speak up, you're going to get reprimanded. Yeah, that's one thing I would do in my organization. Have an open feedback loop. How could leadership really create an environment and nurture an environment of a real open door policy? And not some bullshit just saying it to say it, Angela. Like when I say I have an open door policy, like that means come and say anything. How do you build that?
And it's so important that you're naming that, because a lot of companies do this in terms of being performative. And then when they hear something they don't like,
Right.
it's like all bets are off. We saw a couple of weeks ago with Jamie Dimon, right? He had a town hall meeting. An employee stood up and asked a question around the remote work policy. Jamie was probably having a bad day. He apologized later,
Oh,
but
he
he
went
went
off.
off. Yeah, he
Went
went
off.
off, right? And so in that moment where you have a town hall where you're inviting all of your employees to ask questions, and then someone brings up a topic that you don't like, how you respond in that matter really, it really matters, how you respond in that moment. And I think about what happened afterwards. So, Jamie goes along his day. That employee gets yanked into the office by his direct manager, who literally fires him on the spot, tells him to take his things and go home.
It's
I don't think
ridiculous.
that Jamie told the manager to do that, but the manager is like working in this zero sum workplace mentality, right? That's what happens when you tick off the big boss, you get fired and you go. Well, that's performative. And for anyone else that was watching that, do you think they're going to stand up and give an idea that they
No.
might risk?
They did
Absolutely not.
that message has been sent and received loud and clear.
Yes. And despite Jamie, having a bad day and apologizing, that's showing you your culture at the end of the day. And so I think leaders, when they open and say that they want a win-win workplace, they're setting up meetings, they're having town halls, they have to be ready to operationalize the insights, even the ones that may not align with their own understanding. They have to lean in with curiosity.
Interesting. Let's switch gears for a little bit and talk about equity as a profit driver. And you advocate for seeing equity as a profit driving mechanism rather than compliance. Can you share like a real world example? And you don't have to name the company of how this is done right. And we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about right now. We're talking about the E in DEI and B, folks.
Yeah. And I think, equity can be looked in a lot of different ways. As it relates to DEI, I tell people I don't want to fall on the sword. When we look at the origins of DEI, it was really about how do we invest in the conditions and people so they can show up fully and do their job
Right.
and contribute to the company. So that's the genesis of that. And I would love to give a shout out to a company. I was with the CEO. Her name is Carrie Siggins. She's the CEO of a company called Stone Age, and they're an employee owned company. And so when we talk about equity,
Right.
literally every employee has skin in the game. And what she's created there is that open door policy. People can come in that they feel like, they've got skin in the game, their ideas are needed and actually are critical to the success of the organization. So they do that by actually offering shares in the company. But I think more than that, what they're doing is really operationalizing the insights, and they put processes in place so companies and employees can actually come with their ideas to improve the company. She gets the ideas, and what she'll tell you if she was on this show, she'd say, some of them we can do, some of them we can't do,
Right.
and some of
Of
them we
course.
can't do right now. And what she does and what she's heard from her employees, and we saw when we did the interviews, is they respect that she comes to them and has enough respect for them that she's able to tell them and bring them into her thinking of what they can do and why they can't do certain things right now. That has a huge benefit.
That is true open door. That is true radical listening, radical transparency when you could have that, which is rare. And it sets, it really sets an example. And it's not easy for a lot of organizations to do by nature of legacy but like when we talk about D and I and B, right? What's your response to leaders that still see it as as a nice to have versus a competitive advantage? Like what are those competitive advantages to truly embracing a true intentional DEI and B policy, not because we need to check the box.
Yeah. So one, stop checking the box and start measuring it.
Right.
So anytime we talk about DEI and programs, we want to actually make sure that they're having the intended benefits. The only way that you would know that is actually by setting a line in the stand and saying, okay, this is our base point.
Mhm.
This is the North Star of what we're trying to get. And these are the 2-3 things that we're going to measure, and then actually measure them. Not once a year. I say at a minimum once a
Consistent.
quarter, right? And consistently. And think about how do you operationalize those insights. You're making sure that they're getting to your frontline managers who are hopefully thinking of themselves as frontline leaders. You're actually re-looking at your strategy through those insights, and you're playing rinse and repeat at the end of the day. That's the
Of
difference.
course.
And that takes DEI from an acronym to actually being something that drives the business, and you'll have the data to support that.
All right. Well, let's talk about it. What is a good metric? What is a good KPI to really monitor the health of equity within an organization?
Absolutely. So again, I'm not a big fan of huge long surveys. You can ask people 3 key questions if we're thinking about the health of our employees and how they're engaging. One is, and we see this all the time, would you refer this company to someone? Why or why?
Mm,
And the second thing that we really love is the stay interview before people decide to leave. What is the one thing that keeps you working at insert this?
what's that retention metric, right?
What's that retention metric? We want to know from them, what do they value most? As employers, we're investing millions of dollars into training, into benefits. We need to know which ones are valued the most. And perceived value is very different than the dollar value at the end of the day.
That's a big one. So you and I could talk for a long time. There's certainly things that I want to hit on here. Let's talk about the book for a minute. The Win-Win Workplace. Angela, what did you learn about yourself in the process of writing this book?
What I learned about myself really is that, and I'm thinking about this a bit.
Yeah, take your time. Take your time here because this is a very introspective type of question. And I love asking authors about this because it kind of catches them off guard, right? Because you're so used to talking about your book. You're so used to talking about what's in it. But what did it do for you, Angela?
It really made me lean into the people aspect of workers. We talk about workers, we talk about employees, but what I learned is that the investment of time from senior leaders is the most important thing that you can do. And even for me and my team now, I think about, my staff, my teaching staff at Harvard, for Future Forward Institute. An hour with me, an hour of time is something, if you can give someone that and spare that and be full on attention, not texting, not sending emails where they're talking, that's the most valuable thing that you can
Be
give to your
present.
employees.
Be present. I
Be
I
pre-
I remember I was on. I had, and I'm not calling somebody out, but I am not going to call them out by name. It was early on with the show. And it was a high profile person, and I'm literally interviewing this person, and the whole time they're literally like on camera, not even like down hiding it. And I was like, be present. It wasn't, this person only gave me 15 minutes. Is it that hard for 15 minutes to give me your time? You don't care about that other person who's invested time to prepare and be excited for this show. Like it's just common decency. So your work has been featured in CNN, Harvard Business Review, and TEDx. What is that one idea you've shared that has sparked the biggest reaction, either positive or negative?
I think the
What's
biggest
gotten the
one,
biggest reaction out there?
yeah, I think the biggest one is this concept of shared value, right? And by that I mean really the win-win. We've been taught and raised professionally, and I'd say in this country, that someone has to lose for me to win.
Hmm.
And so the idea that we can think that both people, the employee and the employer, can actually work together and win, I think is refreshing, and it's resonating deeply. As I'm going out on the book tour, I've been to 20 cities and counting at this time. Despite the headlines, people are yearning for community. They're yearning for a different way of life and work in general. And I think introducing this concept where we can do work a different way and make work more workable is one that's resonating with many people.
I love. I mean, listen, we throw around the word community, but I'm really seeing this real resurgence of community in many different ways, right? Whether it be your personal community, your home community, maybe your child like your school community, all coming together, and people really seeing what it meant. And I think that was one of the things that came out of the pandemic, right? We all went to work in the morning and we come back, but now we're all working at home and we're in the neighborhood, we're in the community, and we're relying on each other. We're getting back to tribalism in a good way
I
and
think you're
leaning into it. And companies that kind of embrace the concept of it and what it means, and you could apply a lot of the learnings and the positive attributes of it to your workplace culture. Those are the ones that are going to keep winning into the future.
I completely agree. I was really struck. I was going through the San Francisco airport on the book tour, and I was on United Airlines. And at the desk, someone leaned in curious, the woman that was, checking me in, and she goes, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Oh, I've been traveling for this book tour." And I told her about the book. And she goes, "You know what, Dr. Angela?" That's when she looked at her. She goes,
Yeah.
"I just want to tell you something. You're on to something." She goes, My husband died and I'd been married to him for 50 years. You know who I depended on?" And she looked to her left and right with her fellow kind of workers who were working at the desk there at United. And she goes, "You know what the company did? The company ended up paying for his funeral." That's why I've
Mm.
worked for United for, decades, because these are the people who invest in me. They were there for me when my husband passed away.
At
They
our
were
lowest,
there
yeah.
at my down moment. And it struck me as I was getting on the plane, we all want that in terms of community. We
We
really
all
do.
want
We
that.
want to be seen at our lowest or darkest moment and know that people still have us, they trust us, and they
Hmm.
still believe in us. And that's something we can have at workplaces where we spend literally a third of our lives. So saying that we can't have it, I think, is a cop out. We can invest. And to your point, it's about being present and
Takes
just
effort.
taking the time.
Anything worthwhile takes effort here. So who's the book for, Angela? Who should be reading it? Who should be picking it up?
So any manager who is managing people should look at this. And the big takeaway is ask your people how they're doing and what they want. Listen to
Mm.
them and be curious enough to say what you can do and what you can't do. The second, I say this isn't for employees. I want people to feel hopeful. We're seeing lots of headlines about this tech company laying off people, government jobs that are leaving. A lot of people are really afraid at this time. I want people to know that there are companies that are doubling down on their investments in people. There's dozens of them in case studies that are in the book. And so would love for them to think about using this as a lens as they're looking at their next employer. They're using this book as a lens when they're talking to their direct manager and asking for things that they might need and offering up some of the data about how investments in people is actually helping the bottom line. I've seen and I've gotten emails from people who've done this, and it said it just opened up a new conversation. Again, most managers will tell you that they're ready to invest in their people. Let's give them some real ideas on how to do this.
Isn't that the goal of the book? If you could spark one change, one conversation, one positive interaction, then it's all worth it, right? If you can improve someone's job, improve someone's company, improve the culture there by sparking an idea and people listening, I absolutely love it. So before we wrap it up here, what's keeping you up at night these days? What is just rattling around in that head that's not letting you sleep?
The biggest thing is this like return to the old way of what I call in the book that
Mm,
zero workplace. And really it frightens me because the world has changed drastically since the pandemic, right? We all had this collective timeout and we all know, what's really important now. We talk about family, we talk about health.
hmm.
And this orientation to get back to normal when normal didn't work for a lot of people does keep me up because I feel like we're making some unforced errors in this moment. As leaders, we know better, we have more information, and we can do better. And so I'm just hoping that this book, these conversations like we're having on the podcast, will have people
That's
at
right.
least get curious about some of these investments and this time and some of the pillars that are in the book.
Tremendous. Everyone pick up the book. It's called The Win-Win Workplace, How Thriving Employees Drive Bottom Line Results. It is out now. Let's finish strong here. Angela, what is that single greatest piece of career advice that you've ever received that you take action on every day?
Every day I was told, make friends before you need them. Really double down on those investments with relationships and people. They'll pay off in multitude of ways. I think about this book. I've gotten emails from peers from when I was 20, all
Yes.
along my career. And that's what it means, right? We're all in the community together and doing this.
Amen to all of that. And last but not least, you, by any traditional textbook definition, you have reached the pinnacle of success in many different areas of your life. And now you're a New York Times best-selling author. But Dr. Angela Jackson, at this point of your life, how do you define success?
Yeah, I literally, and what I say, and if people meet me in person, I define success by the quality of relationships that I have with my family and friends. Period. End of story. I talk about my career when, laying on that couch, bandaged up, and sat there, didn't have a relationship, hadn't seen my family, but I had all the trappings of success. That's nothing. When I look at my success today, I'm like, am I present for my husband, for my daughter, from my community? That's how I measure if I'm doing it well.
Purposeful pause right there, because I completely agree with you. Absolutely. I mean, you look at, and it comes with maturity, and it comes with life experiences, because at the end of the day, that's what we have. We have our loved ones, and we have the people that are closest to us. And some of them was a professional. I mean, some of my closest friends started in the professional networking world, because you're attracted. Good people are attracted to each other, and it's not about money, right? Like, money's just a fuel for the happy. Money's just a fuel to get things done and do things, but that's not necessarily happiness. Dr. Angela Jackson, I want to thank you so much for your time. Again, everyone check out the book, The Win-Win Workplace. We're going to link it up. Where else can folks find you? Where could they connect? Where could they learn more? Did I miss anything here?
No, you didn't miss anything. They can go to readwinwinworkplace.com and see all the details on the book. Also, I'd love to just give an offer to all of your listeners. We're hosting the Win-Win Workplace Summit on May 5th and May 6th in Chicago. We're going to have many of the employers that are in the book on the stage talking about how they implement the pillars. And we'll give a 20% discount to any of your listeners who go on to the site.
Well, definitely check it out. Not sure if it's going to come out exactly by then. We're going to try to get it out before then. We'll see what the schedule looks like there too. But Angela, I want to thank you so much for joining me, and everyone out there. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. Sharing means caring. If this episode meant something to you, leave a review, a rating. It goes a long way. You know where to find out more at thepodcast.com. Check us out on YouTube /thepodcast, on Instagram at NHP Talent. Remember, be good to yourself, be better to others, and catch us next week for another great episode of the podcast. Take care, everybody.
Wisdom is forever, but for us, it's time to go. Thank you for joining us. Luckily, we'll be back with our next episode soon, jam-packed with more incredible humans. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing. To join the conversation, search The Podcast on LinkedIn. And to catch up on past episodes and more info, please visit www.thepodcast.com.